Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the next session. This session is part of the Teaching and Learning Through Survivor Testimonies session, and this particular panel is on experiences, research and learning resources. As you can see, I am not Alex Maws. There's been a change in chair. I'm Clementine Smith. I'm Director of Programmes at the Holocaust Educational Trust. I'm going to keep the introductions very brief so that I can pass straight over to the speakers. Today we are going to hear from Christina Bruning at the University of Marburg, who you can see here is joining us via Zoom. We're joined by Ruth-Ann Lenga from the Centre of Holocaust Education at UCL, as well as Dorothy Wein from the Free University in Berlin. I'm going to pass straight over to Christina first on Zoom. Christina will disappear whilst the others are speaking because they're sharing the screen. But at the end, if we do have time for questions, Christina will rejoin us here. But as I said, I want to make sure that we've got time to hear from the panelists. So I'm going to hand straight over to Christina first. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the nice introduction. I'm really sorry I'm not able to be with you. My son unfortunately decided to break his arm in a very complicated manner and needed a surgery, and now he's at home and in pain and getting on my nerves. So all the fun part that you have, I'm unfortunately missing out on. Can you all see the screen? Is it working? Yeah? Good. Perfect. So I'll talk about a mutual project that I've done with Sanna Stegmaier from the King's College London and the Humboldt University in Berlin. And we've been researching the interactive biography, or in German we usually call it interactive testimony, by Anita Lasker-Wallfisch. That was the first German-speaking interactive testimony that you might have heard about from the USC Shoah Foundation. So part of the criticism that this whole project faced from the beginning was because most of the advertisements focused very much on the 3D effect that the project was supposed to give. So the term of holograms came into life, and a lot of researchers commented on this. Rachel Baum, for example, called it uncanny. Micha Brumlik talked about some kind of random avatars that will continue to live on even after the survivors have passed. So most of the criticism was focused on this idea of creating holograms or a holographic theater. In fact, Sanna and me are arguing that the most interesting part about this project is not the 3D depiction that is used in places like the holographic theater in Illinois. I'll just play the short clip. I'm sure you won't even you won't be able to hear it because of the Zoom and the audio channel and everything. But just to give you an idea, a lot of those survivor testimonies are used in a way where people have the impression that the person is actually in the room. And the German-speaking testimony that Sanna and me researched was actually in a very different setting. I'll also just show you a short clip and then say something about it. Oops. So you can see it's rather a big screen. It's two-dimensional. It doesn't give you the impression that the person is actually in a room. Yes, it's a big screen, so the survivor is almost life-size. But what is the interesting part is, as you here saw with Sanna asking her a question, is that you have a voice recognition software, so you can ask the person a question. Now I'm doing the same mistake that I always criticize when people talking about the project. You can ask the system a question. The voice recognition software understands the question, best case, and then pulls a clip and plays you a pre-recorded answer. So there's no, I don't know, artificial intelligence or machine learning in the sense of new answers are created or whatever. It's just those over 1,000 questions that Sanna back then in 2019 asked Anita Lasker-Wallfisch. And in this 5-day interview, she answered all those questions. All those questions were taped individually. It was filmed with volumetric recording. So one day when the technique will be better, it could actually be possible to create a full hologram, a 3D version of it. At the moment, it's not possible. The German interview was founded by the EVZ-Stiftung, the Erinnerung, Verantwortung, Zukunft Stiftung. And this is actually the project that we did the beta testing with. So in our Begleitstudie, in our study working with it during the beta testing, we invited students groups into the German Technikmuseum here in Berlin and asked them to interact with this new project and to see how they liked it, which questions they asked, what they focused on, and so on. So schools were able to participate after they registered. We had school groups from as early as 9th grade up to 13th grade, so shortly before their A-levels. And all in all, Sanna taught more than 27 project days, but those are the ones that we can use the data from because everything worked with the technique and we were able to record group sessions afterwards and stuff like that. So one thing that is probably interesting and was definitely not planned was that when COVID hit, we suddenly decided or had to decide to have a different setting as well for these project days because we couldn't do them in the museum anymore. Everything was shut down in Germany for quite a long time, especially schools couldn't go on project days for a long time. So we continued in an online setting. So we have two different settings. One is the students coming in groups into the museum and interacting with the project, and the other one is doing it online on the platform Eyewitness at home, every student on their own computer, not in a big group setting, which definitely changed everything, like the number of questions you can ask, the shame you feel if you're in a huge group with your peers and you don't want to ask a wrong question. This is all very different when you do it in your house. And we found some very interesting things. So here you have the two versions, the online platform Eyewitness and the German Museum of Technology, where there were two different rooms where the project days could take place. I will just give you a very short idea about some of the findings that we had from the qualitative research. I don't think I have enough time to go into the details of what exactly the students wanted to know, but I'll be happy to answer more about it. So a lot of the students said that it felt very interesting, as if the witness was in the room, but a lot of them commented on the technical problems. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but Germany is kind of in stone ages when it comes to internet and Wi-Fi connections. So we had a lot of problems with the system buffering, not being able to play the answers as quickly as it definitely does in the American version, where you can use the testimonies, for example, at UCLA. UC Shoah Foundation. So the students commented on this. It was like if she was in the room, but, and then they said those technical moments were really disrupting and not helping with the immersion. They said it was very simple and felt easier to ask the program questions than it was to actually ask a real witness who's alive and present, which was very interesting. We had a couple of school groups who had actually met real survivors in their schools, in their classrooms, and they said that they were very much afraid to ask something which felt embarrassing or wrong or probably offensive. So they kind of preferred not to ask, and they were not afraid to ask here in this situation because they knew it's just a computer system that gives them the answers. A lot of the students commented on something which they called it's persönlicher. It feels more personal. They felt more connected to it than to their normal history lessons. History, unfortunately, has a reputation for being quite a boring subject in German schools, where you have to learn a lot of numbers and dates and facts and figures by heart. So they said that usually when they are taught with their history books, or the teacher shows them a documentary or just gives them a lecture, it feels a little bit boring, and this is more personal if you learn through the New Dimensions in Testimony project. They said it was more easily accessible. That was actually interesting, because a lot of students said something like, endlich konnte ich mal was fragen, und mir wurde direkt auf meine Frage geantwortet. So finally I could ask something that I was really interested in, and I got an answer on that one. So the students have obviously the feeling that their history teaching doesn't address their questions, but addresses questions that they are probably not interested in. And they felt it was different with the New Dimensions in Testimony, or Dimensions in Testimony DIT. They dropped the new. And so they said that even the unanswered questions, like even the questions where because of the beta testing, the program did not give a good answer, or probably there wasn't even a pre-recorded answer, so they didn't get one, were kind of interesting, because they found out more additional aspects of the survivor's biography by listening to other things that were played, but were actually probably not what they asked. A lot of the negative comments, or probably like more skeptical comments, because we also asked them like what they would recommend to change about the project and stuff like that. So a lot of them commented on using the same word like Rachel Baum used in her research. They said that it's unheimlich oder gruselig, so kind of uncanny, or even kind of haunting. Gruselig would be a term for, I don't know, a ghost appearing in a haunted castle or something. Some students even said that the documentaries they usually watch, they said, well, we watched blah, blah, blah on YouTube or something like that. So they said it provided similar information, and there was no extra information by listening to testimony. So they probably even didn't differentiate between the different sources. Some said they had no emotional connection. So it would be very interesting. And we were planning on doing that to compare this to the English-speaking testimony, the English-speaking interactive biography by Anita Lasker-Wolfish, because she's one of the, I think, very few people who've given a testimony in 2 different languages. Maybe she's the only one, actually. I should ask Sana. So that could be very interesting to see the difference if English-speaking students and the English-speaking testimony have similar situations about the emotional connection to the person. The technical elements I already mentioned, and the frustrating experiences if the questions could not be answered. So we asked us 2 things. We thought, first of all, the voice recognition software for us seems to be the major difference, and not the fact that it's an illusion that seems to be holographic, or that the depiction is probably interesting. I really think that this question of we can ask what we are interested in and we get an immediate answer, which might be difficult because, you know, they don't have to get the broader context anymore. You don't have to go into family life before the war. You don't have to go into afterlife after the war. You can just ask about Auschwitz if that's what you're interested in. Okay, so it can be very challenging to think about that students probably are only interested in a very small aspect of this person's life who gave testimony here. Then we have a kind of new narrative that forms, because every time these answers are assembled in a new way, and the questions that are asked also influence which answers come. And also we have personnel staff who's working in the background to address the right, or to match the answer and the question so that the system gets better, especially in the beta testing phase. This is very true, that you have people working in the background to make the project more reliable in the future. So how do we call these kind of new sources and narratives that result from this multiple authorship situation? I already talked about the advantages and disadvantages of the 2 settings, having people come into a museum asking questions, probably in a pedagogical setting where somebody is there as an intermediator between the project and the people asking, like you've seen in the Illinois Holocaust Museum, or do you want to do it all on your own at a computer in your house? But how do you make sure that people are not, I don't know, telling anti-Semitic jokes and handling the whole situation in a very problematic way? So I think especially for historical learning, there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages of both settings that we researched that we have to talk about in more detail. For German historians who work in history teacher education, which we call Geschichtsdidaktik, we also have to think about if there's really narrative competence, which is kind of the main goal in history teacher education and historical learning. Is it even possible to create something like narrative competence in these kind of ping-pong question and answer situations? Like, how do we still make students understand what kind of source? How do you analyze? How do you criticize this kind of source? How do you continue to work with it, especially if it's just a very short workshop situation or input in a museum that you can ask this Dimensions in Testimony project something, and then the workshop is already over. And this is the last point I already mentioned, like how do we make sure that people are still within what we expect Holocaust education to result in, and not being, I don't know, anti-Semitic, anti-democratic, and using the project for the wrong reasons. So at the moment, I have a cooperation with Lisa Zachrich and Anja Balles from LMU München and University of Tübingen. And we actually think that this question of how much does the interaction matter, like how effective is it? This is something that we will measure. We've set up a little study. You can see the slide here. And we'll have groups of students who will who will watch the testimony and will answer questions afterwards, and the other ones can interact with the project. They listen to the same video, but then they can ask their own questions and see which answers come up. And we'll see if there's a difference between those two groups in the way they emotionally react, in the way they immerse into the project, in the way that they describe their historical learning progress, and so on. And then Sanna Stegmaier and me also decided to continue on why people actually like this and why they want to use it in teaching. So we started interviewing museum staff members in museums in America where they are using the interactive biographies for pedagogical and educational settings. And we asked them about why they decided to apply to use this technique and what they think are the advantages of it and so on. So this is just so that you know there are follow-up activities, and this is definitely not the final step. We are still in the process of thinking about a lot of things, and I've given you my colleague Verena Negel, who's actually with you, probably not in the same room because I think she's in a parallel panel, and Sanna Stegmaier and me, we've all published on this thing. So if you're interested in finding out more, you are very welcome to go and look up some of those texts that I gave. Okay, that's it, like very short introduction, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I don't know if you'll do the Q&A in the end, so I'll just finish this.
Christina, thank you very much. We are going to pass over to the next speaker, and we're going to have questions if we have time at the end. But Christina, thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Ruth-Ann Lenga to join us. Ruth-Ann is Director of Programs at UCL's Center for Holocaust Studies, and we'll be talking about their work, and specifically your work with Leon Greenman and how that has shaped the pedagogical approaches of the center. So thank you, Ruth-Ann.
Okay. I think it was Bruno Bettelheim who said that storytelling is akin to the giving of a gift. and how immeasurably amplified that notion becomes when the storyteller is a survivor of the Holocaust, who recounts their harrowing testimony to an audience of complete strangers, time after time in their twilight years, and, moreover, to groups of young people 2 to 3 generations distant from them, who come to school with their own varied and often difficult life experiences. My 30 years, I know it's that long, working closely with a number of survivors, especially London-born Auschwitz survivor Leon Greenman, as well as hundreds of teachers in training, has given me a rare insight into the complex dynamic of that interaction and how deeply profound that encounter can be. I often wonder how these remarkable survivors and refugees do it. How is it possible to speak of the unspeakable horrors they witnessed, lay bare their soul, and give of themselves to that extent by sharing the circumstances surrounding their darkest, ever-present past? How does a human being find the courage to do that? How, Agnes, do you put yourself through it? Why, Eva and Martin, are you so compelled to do so? From what I have witnessed, sharing testimony of this nature is far more than the giving of a gift. It is an act, I believe, of complete selflessness, the likes of which is unparalleled. Despite the pain, unrest, and fear the process engenders, Leon was single-minded in his determination to speak of his experiences, ever ready, anytime, any place, anywhere, to anyone who would listen. The Holocaust was omnipresent in his world and became the meaning to his survival. Why? He had to speak for those who are no more, as he would put it, those who were murdered, like his wife Elsa and his 2-year-old boy Barney, who he would describe as a beautiful child with peachy cheeks and as strong as a lion. It was his sole mission. He was determined that his talks could change people for the better, warn them of what will happen if they go down the route of hate. But he paid a price. It would take him a long time to settle after speaking. He couldn't shut out the memories once they had been unleashed. Nightmares ravished him. Sometimes he would not be able to eat or sleep after a talk or recording, and his prolific, high-profile speaking led to him being targeted by neo-Nazi Combat 18 thugs who sent him death threats and attacked his home in Ilford with bricks. He was in his late 80s at the time. There is no doubt, and I'm sure it has been said many times yesterday and today, how indebted we are to survivors, refugees, hidden children, for what they have done and do in giving of themselves in this selfless way. Those too who have not been able to give their testimony have taught us much as well. In many cases, their silence illuminates further the extent of the pain they still endure, the extent of the long-term trauma and the long-standing legacy of the Holocaust. The mere existence among us, their existence among us prevails and rings out a powerful message about survival against the odds. My interest in survivors' capacity to share their testimony and the impact on young people has emerged from my experience, my research, and my practice, working directly with teachers in training spaces. In this brief cameo session, I will share examples of how our work at UCL Centre for Holocaust Education has built research-informed programs that aim to engage secondary school students in the life and testimony of Leon Greenman, who sadly passed away in 2008 at the marvellous age of 97, having never remarried but lived an independent life, albeit somewhat lonely. Without that direct engagement of meeting him face-to-face now possible, what we seek to do at UCL Centre for Holocaust Education is to try to build a connection between students and Leon through a pedagogic approach and use of his recorded testimony. The work we have done has shown it is possible to draw students to Leon in a remarkable way. Following the journey we take them on, teachers remark that in classroom discussions, students speak about Leon in the present, even though they never physically met him and know that he passed away some 15 years previously. That is the sort of impact and resonance Leon has in their lives. But first, a word about when Leon first began speaking. I know he would want me to draw your attention to this. Now, I think Bayer will have already given a presentation, or maybe is going to, which shows a film where Leon declares that he was one of the first to ever give his testimony. Well, like most extraordinary aspects of Leon's story, there was evidence to be found to confirm them. Take a look at this. This is a report that was published in the Evening Standard on the 25th of April, 1945. Yes, 25th of April, 1945. Leon, now aged 35, had just been liberated from Buchenwald when Anne Matteson, a journalist, found this Englishman and interviewed Leon. Desperate to get news out to his family that he was alive, he found the strength to speak to her about what had taken place. She describes him in this article as from Forest Gate, London, thin, hollow-eyed, but in good spirits. The title given to the piece, as you can see, was The Barber of Buchenwald. Leon was a barber before the war and shaved men in the camps to get a little more extra soup. Then, a month later, Leon was interviewed by the BBC while he was recovering in a Red Cross hospital in Paris. And here I have the original sound archive. I'm not sure whether I have time to play it, but in the scratchy BBC recording has Leon speaking of the slave labour at Auschwitz, the death marches, and being alive but desperate still to find out what had happened to his wife and child, who, unbeknown to him, had been murdered shortly after their arrival there from Westerbork in January 1943. I worked... It starts with
a song in my heart. I approach your adorable face, just a song at the start, but it soon was a hymn to your grace.
My name is Leon Bruning, and I used to live in Forest Gate. I got married in 1935 to a Dutch girl, and we decided to go to Holland, where we settled down. It was there in Rotterdam that the Hun picked us up, all of us. My wife, Els, myself, and our child, Barney, who was then 2.5 years old. Before we realized it, we were on the road to hell. With hundreds of other people, mostly Jews like us, we were sent across Holland, through Germany into Upper Silesia, until we arrived at Birkenau, about 5 miles from Auschwitz. Before we knew what was happening, we were chased out of the train, and an SS officer with a club in his hand started to separate the man from the women and children, shouting and bullying us, and hitting the ones who didn't move quickly enough or who wanted to stay together. I can still see my wife with a kid in her arms when we were separated. Not even a chance for a kiss. I had not seen or heard of them since. And that is now nearly 3 years ago.
I worked with Leon for many years at the Jewish Museum in London. I would prepare the students for the encounter of meeting Leon and would often have to mediate and help students present their questions to Leon. This was in the early 90s when he was in his early 80s. He would never turn down a request. Come rain or shine, whether he felt fit or unwell, he would go and give the talk, insisting on traveling by public transport rather than by taxi. He just had to do things the hard way, every time. For Leon, this was not an invitation to speak. This was a moral duty, which he was compelled to do. I don't dare presume, but I sense he needed to justify his survival, make every minute worthy of it. He would always arrive an hour or two early, meaning he would rise ridiculously early in order to get himself sorted and mind ready. He treated students as equals and didn't deviate, adjust, or soften his story according to their age. He trusted their capacity to go with him, and they did. His authenticity and rawness was magnetic to anyone and everyone of any age. I remember one occasion, a couple of decades ago, which caught me by surprise and taught me a good old lesson about teaching and learning about the Holocaust. Leon had come to the end of his talk, which, in part, had described the death marches and how, after the war, in the hospital in Paris, he had had to have a toe removed due to the gangrene that had set in. In my polite fashion, I invited the students who had listened to the whole talk, totally absorbed, if anyone had a question for Leon. One student, around 14, put up his hand and asks, "Can I see Mr. Greenman's amputated toe?" At which point I, the naive educator, who thought I knew better and was concerned for what I thought was appropriate question and what wasn't, began to divert the student away from that and move swiftly to another, except for the fact that I was stopped by the fact that Leon, who was just sitting there, had, in a split second, already got his shoe and sock off, and the whole throng had virtually knocked me over to peer down at the toe that wasn't there. I learned that day that young people need to see the visceral evidence, and Leon needed to give it. My role was not to stand between the two, but to be there to support and create the right space. Teachers often were gobsmacked at the way some of their most unlikely of students grew 10 foot tall in that short encounter, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, after meeting and hearing Leon. So many principles from such observations have formed the basis of the pedagogy of the UCL Centre for Holocaust Education. Here's a few of them. Take students seriously. Don't underestimate. You may need to reach up to their level of emotional understanding rather than look down. Risks are sometimes worth the taking. Affective as well as the cognitive are important. Don't try to sanitize the Holocaust. You can't. But you have a duty of care, of course, to the survivor, to the history, and to the child, and you constantly need to work through that difficult dynamic. The Centre for Holocaust Education, where I'm Programme Director, conducted research in 2016 to try to find out more. Nearly 9,000 students aged between 11 and 18, and followed it up with focus group interviews with 72 young people from 12 different schools. Of these, next. 89.4% agreed or strongly agreed that hearing a survivor speak had made the Holocaust feel more real. 87.5% indicated that they had found the experience upsetting, and 81.8% agreed that it helped their understanding of how and why the Holocaust took place. Let me just give you some quotes. So we were really interested in this aspect of the fact that young people constantly were telling us that it was through meeting the survivor, hearing their testimony, that it was only then that they were grasping the reality of it, which made me really worry about those who weren't able to meet a survivor and what were they thinking about this. We interviewed them, and when I asked them this, they sort of said, well, no, it's not that we don't believe our teachers, but it is a little bit difficult to comprehend, is it not? You know, they were talking like that. So here a child says, I think it is when, like You can see them. You know you are like in the same room as them. You know that they are saying it from their story. Like you can see the emotion on their face, the tone of their voice. You can tell by their emotions. Whereas in a video, like, or anything else, you are not that face-to-face kind of thing. You are not in that intimacy of what actually happened. That's a year 9, that's 14-year-old. And another child talks about the momentous aspect of engaging with a survivor. The atmosphere in the room, we were utterly silent. And here's another one. And this one is beautiful, really, because I think this was after meeting survivor Ziggy Schipper. A student said how they were laughing and crying with Ziggy, with him at the same time. And the way that the child was able to articulate that really struck home. I only have 1 minute to go, and I have so much more to share with you, but I don't really have the time. Just to say that at UCL we have developed CPD programs for teacher training, for beginning teachers, for existing experienced teachers. We have a master's program, and we have a Beacon School program in Holocaust education. 20 schools a year are selected by us, and we work with them and mentor the teachers in the schools to improve the quality of Holocaust education. And I'm delighted that we have Charlotte Lane in the audience over there, who reached such a high quality of Holocaust education in her school that we awarded her and the school with UCL quality mark status in Holocaust education. I'm absolutely delighted she's here. Leon appears in everything. We weave the story of Leon throughout our offer. And it is through that sort of engagement that the students build their understanding of Leon, that we feel we can build this connection with a survivor that they've not met, but they have access to his story through skilled teachers who we train in the art of storytelling, learning from survivors who bear their soul in that process. We help teachers to be able to tell their stories and also intersperse them with original testimonies. One of the and I wanted to show you the way in which we open up those lessons through objects and artifacts that aren't really the usual ones that one might think of when looking at the Holocaust, but draw you into a personal encounter. I just want to, if I will be allowed, one of our strategies, we also, by the way, look here, we work with a session that we engage students with on understanding what it is to survive the Holocaust. And it's through this sort of program that we look at Leon's life and how he manages the trauma that he lives with. And this is a poem that I found in his house after he passed, an unfinished poem with no title. And after young people have learned a lot about Leon at this point, about his life after the war as well, we invite them to respond to the poem in another verse or give the poem a title. And it's just, I've got an example here of how a young person at year 8, that could be 13, has responded to Leon's poem. But what I would really like to do, if possible, is end with a minute of Leon talking, because one of our strategies is always to leave our lessons with the voice of the survivor. I wonder if that's possible.
It's been partly a lonely life, but I don't tell the outside world, because that won't help me. But I'm still alive. I don't know how long for yet. Time is getting on, and that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruth-Ann. I'm now going to introduce our final speaker, Dorothy, who works in the digital interview collections at the Free University at Berlin. As I said, I'm keeping introductions very short so that our speakers have as much time as possible.
Thank you very much. For many of us, teaching about the Holocaust, encounters with survivors have become essential for developing our own historical awareness. It is therefore not surprising that the near end of the opportunity to meet people who survived the Shoah is also considered a challenge for historical learning of the next generations. Annette Wiewiórka has demonstrated how an era of witnesses that began with the Eichmann trial has been marked by references to its near end ever since the 1980s. However, the increasing necessity to speak has caused an intensified activity of collecting audiovisual interviews with survivors of the Holocaust since the 1980s. Today, as it has been mentioned, it can be assumed that more than 100,000 video testimonies have been preserved worldwide. Although a multitude of highly impressive contemporary documents from different perspectives support research and teaching about the Shoah today and in the future, thanks to the video interviews, we have an additional type of source to do so. However, they require their own approaches and need to be properly contextualized, because otherwise many opportunities would be missed. The educational challenges for video testimonies are related to the following questions. How do we grant access to the sources and in which formats? And how do we contextualize them? What kind of questions do we focus on? And connections, how do young people relate to the video testimonies? In several projects, our team at Digital Interview Collections at the Freie Universität Berlin has been testing and developing different approaches to these unique sources over the last 15 years, from workshops and DVD editions up to online applications. I would like to refer to the application Zeugen der Shoah, that is Witnesses of the Shoah, as an example for the use of video testimonies in school education. The online application Witnesses of the Shoah offers half-hour-long biographical interview films, materials for historical contextualization, as well as tasks and method tips that make young people aware of the specific source value of the videos and guide them to develop their own interpretations. Own texts can be combined with interview excerpts, documents, and pictures. Thus, the digitality enables a combination of the linear medium film with individual accesses to the video via chapter, search, transcript, and the possibility to integrate clips into presentations. Users can edit their results at any time based on their own accounts. While didactic comments make lesson preparation easier for teachers, learning groups allow them to include additional tasks and to present the finished portfolios. As the application is based on a responsive web design, it allows for usage on mobile devices such as smartphones and tablets. In the meantime, there are different versions of the platform. Our partners in a variety of countries developed specific contents and questions based on different interview collections. Contents and connections. However, one crucial factor for visual encounters is what kind of narrations do we as educators choose and for which purposes? So far, the online application Witnesses of the Shoah offers 5 biographical interview films. With such reduction, it is obvious that no representative selection could have been made according to countries or camps or routes of persecution and or escape. The online application presents testimonies from very different collections, and the conditions for their creation are reflected. For example, the oldest interview was given in 1978, and it originates from Landsmann's collection, which he created for his film Shoah. And it's the outtakes that have been mentioned yesterday, which are accessible through the USHMM. The most recent interview in 2013 by the Memorial of the Murdered Jews of Europe. I would highlight some aspects that we are focusing on with the German platform. Primo Levi and others describe the contradiction between the necessity to give testimony and the impossibility of witnessing annihilation. In this sense, the limits of witnessing accompanied the survivors' accounts ever since. Richard Klase was one of the few who escaped from the Treblinka extermination camp during the uprising. Concealing his Jewish identity, he arrived as a Czech forced laborer in Mannheim in September 1943. He remembers his perception of Mannheim as a Judenfreie Stadt. I translated this one to English, the testimonies in German. And then we thought that all Jews have actually been killed somewhere in Treblinka or elsewhere, and that we are how shall I put it, that we are the only examples. Klase was facing a world without survivors already in Mannheim in 1943, as well as in Treblinka, whose nightmarish reality he portrays. Yes, in Treblinka, we also dreamed. You dreamed in Treblinka when you were asleep, and you dreamed in Treblinka even when you were awake. You dreamed it was all a bad dream. It can't be possible that the world just watches without doing anything, without helping. And you dreamed you'd come out one day, and you've dreamed you'll survive, and you'll tell it all. In his narrative, memory is linked to his mission as a survivor, as Richard Klase understood it until the end of his life. For students, it is obvious that the very specific reality of Treblinka is being negotiated here. Nevertheless, in a further step, they can raise the question in which places of the world today people live in fear for their lives and feel abandoned. The educational challenge remains. Confronting the Shoah is the project of complete extermination. Survival was not intended nor predicted, and the survivors have been bothered by the question why they have been the ones who survived and others not for a very long time. Motivations and constructions. The biographical narratives are anything but mere reproductions of the past. Like their underlying memories, they are subject of a permanent process of reworking. Life stories are constructions, but these constructions are the vertebral column of life in the present. Like Richard Klase, all witnesses have a motivation why they give testimony. These can differ a lot, but in most cases they are very strong, since the survivors are seen as bearers of the unprecedented history of the Shoah. People who have been denied their existence become experts on their history and that of their murdered family members and friends. Our interview films begin with a prologue in which the survivors reflect on their own memories and narrations. So maybe we can change on the platform, for instance, and hear the words of Anita Laske-Wolfquist, who is one of the 5 testimonies on the platform.
Questions asked. We would have been prepared to talk. How far we would have got to actually tell anything is another matter. But nobody asks, because nobody wants to know. Nobody, I mean, let's face it, wants to enter into other people's miseries, you know. Really. So that's why I'm very careful when I do give lectures, not to dwell on the miseries, because it's not really interesting to you. You know, how cold, how hungry, it's meaningless. All I'm trying to instill in youngsters is their attitude to other people, really. And what can happen if things go completely wrong.
Yeah, we go out here? Okay, this statement highlights two things to the young people.
Well, I was born in Breslau.
They are the addressees, and they encounter a woman who consciously takes decisions about how she tells her story. The entire interview film can be examined with respect to resistant behaviors described in it, but also with respect to what extent Anita Lask-Wolf is focused on questions of the attitude of the individual shapes her own narrative. The role of young people facing the interviews. The act of giving testimony, which included the interviewer as a listener, played a decisive role for Dori Laub and his colleagues who initiated the video collection of the Fortune of Archive. The interviewer was understood as a dialogical counterpart who made the testimony possible in the first place. Can this understanding also be transferred to the reception of the video interviews? And what kind of relationship to the survivor is established while watching a film? It is leading to a secondary dialogue, and would it turn the listener themselves to witnesses of the witnesses who should take responsibility for the memories as it has been recommended? Maybe yes, but I have some doubts whether such strongly preformed expectations are necessarily conducive to a self-determined learning process. Students often come with a cliched image which on closer inspection is not suitable for many video interviews. Instead of a stereotyped victim staged via social markers of trauma, they recognize a subject who tells and interprets her life story. This could be part of one of the lessons learned with video interviews. What conclusions young people draw from their own lives, for their own lives and their own narrations today and in the future is a matter for them to decide. So far, they most frequently assume that they have been more aware of the extent of the crimes of National Socialism on the basis of an individual's narrative. It is to see how the young people respond to the video testimonies in 10 or 20 years from now on. But the last decades have shown that our questions are changing, but those sources are there and can be explored and interpreted and related to. Thank you very much.
Dorothy, thank you very much for that. I'm sure, as you're all aware, you can see that we are still overrunning. I've been asked to wrap up the session without questions, but to remind everyone that we are going to be taking lunch shortly, so you can ask panelists that are with us any questions you have in the breakout room next door. Before we all disperse, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining this session today. Christina, it was fantastic to hear from you. Sorry, I don't know if you can see us now, and thank you for joining us via Zoom. It was fascinating to hear about the research you've been doing, in particular to hear a bit about the positives that the students had kind of fed back with and the challenges that exist, including with the tech itself, not just thinking educationally, but the tech issues that we have to be thinking about as we're creating digital resources as well. Ruth-Ann, it was really fascinating to hear from you about the work of the centre. In particular, I was really struck by the comment about the selflessness of those that have shared their testimony, which I think we all think about, but also to think about those that haven't shared their testimony and the reasons for that, and not to ignore that void that exists. Something that I also wanted to pick up on was something you mentioned about Leon. I used to run the Holocaust Educational Trust Ambassador Programme, so I think a lot about what it is that keeps young people going. And you mentioned Leon's engagement with young people and the respect that he showed to them, and saying, you know, we have to trust those that we're talking to. And it's something I see when I work with survivors, and something I think we need to be thinking about. Young people really respond to that trust, and it really resonates in the Ambassador Programme when they talk about not just meeting a survivor and hearing their testimony, which of course is important and humanises this history, but that engagement is around that trust that they see from survivors. And I hope for us as practitioners, it's something that we think about, and we can find that trust that survivors appear to have with the students that they're speaking to. And then finally, Dorothy, it was really interesting to hear from you, and I think something that we're all thinking about is how we contextualize these testimonies that we're using. And in the room today and yesterday, we've got people from across the sector that are working in lots of different ways, and we have to think about, again, this came up, how we balance the trust and sharing these testimonies with the need to kind of responsibly contextualize what it is that we're hearing. And I know that we're all thinking about this. I hope today's session has given you lots to think about. And as I said, as we close, just a reminder that the panelists that are with us today will be in the breakout room if you have any questions. So thank you all again for joining us, and thank you for being here today.